Good evening, everyone. Woo! Welcome to House of SpeakEasy's literary cabaret, Seriously Entertaining. And, oh yes, well, I should introduce myself. I am Amanda Foreman. This is Lucas Whitman, and we are the co-founders of House of SpeakEasy. We are a non-profit dedicated to the mission of connecting communities through words, ideas, and storytelling. Now, over to you, Lucas.
We're thrilled to have you all in the room tonight. In addition to what we do up here on stage, we are also out there in our Speak Together school program, where we bring writers into New York City public schools. And we have our bookmobile, which is out and about and will be out and about all summer long, handing out books, going into communities around New York. There's the bookmobile in action. Handing out books, bringing writers into all different parts of New York, including areas that are book deserts without any access to bookstores or other books. So that's who we are, but you're all here for a fun show. The name of the game tonight is Looking for the Exit, which is appropriate enough for the start of summer and the beginning of summer break. And the end, this is our final show of the season. And we have an amazing 4 speakers for you. Each of them are going to speak for about 12 to 15 minutes each, and there's going to be a quiz in the middle of it as well. Get ready. Our first speaker on the theme of looking for an exit is Chloe Caldwell. Chloe is the essays have appeared in the New York Times, Bon Appetit, The Cut, Vice, Nylon, and many more. Her essay, Hungry Ghost, was listed as a notable in the 2018 Best American Non-Required Reading. Please welcome Chloe to the stage, who's here to celebrate her new book, Women, which was just released today as well. Heads up. Chloe.
Hello. Hi. How's it going? Thank you for having me. Thank you to House of SpeakEasy and Joe's Pub for having me. And happy Pride. It's June. Happy Pride, happy June. Today, June 4th, is an interesting day for me for so many reasons. This past year has been very chaotic and transitory. So it's a really good day for me having my book, Women, come out. It's a great day for me to reflect. Because I don't know if you guys feel this way, but in life, I feel like there are these moments that divide time from like a before and after. So there's this really small moment, and when it happens, you don't know that it's going to become this like deciding factor in your life. It's sort of this like benign, normal throwaway moment. And then you look back on it and you realize that that was everything. So for me, I had one of those moments in March of 2023. I was living with my husband and my stepdaughter. And my stepdaughter and I were addicted to pop culture. So if you name a book, we have read the book, then we would watch the movie, then we would watch the series it turned into, listen to the podcast, read the reviews. She would read the fan fiction, and we would like talk shit about how the book was better than the movie. And this was how we spent our time. This is just what we did for fun. And on that particular morning, we were watching, well, we woke up early. We watched a lot of TV together, not usually in the morning. It's like not the best parenting. However, if it was a show that we were like really into and we had to see what would happen, we would do it in the morning. So my husband was out of town. He was a touring musician, and he was out of town half the year. And my stepdaughter and I would wake up and make tea and make cereal and go like sit on the couch and like be super cozy and watch our show. And at the time, we were watching a series called High School. And this was a series based on a memoir, also called High School, by the iconic musicians Tegan and Sarah. And the show was set in the 90s. These two teenagers, they're twins, in the 90s, and they are living in Canada, and they find music, and they learn how to play guitar, and they start to find their identities and come out as gay. And I was relating very hard to this because of just like I'm around the same age as them, so I loved all the references and the way they were dressed, and it was like this muted 90s show and like very like grunge era. And the thing is, I was really relating to it in a sort of dramatic way, in ways I didn't expect. So like my heart was fluttering, I was getting like pretty emotional. I couldn't stop talking about it. I wanted to like watch it again. And we did watch things again, but my stepdaughter was like, she really liked it too, but I feel like I liked it more. So I was very moved by the show. So we finished the finale, and I go, or she asks me to draw her a bath. So she's always like wanting to take a bath and always had a cold. So I'm like, all right. So I go and I'm starting to make her a bath and put in like the lavender bubble bath and just like in the bathroom, getting the bath ready. And she walks in, and you know how kids are, there's always talking and like, you know, saying things. And she walks in and she says, "When did you know you were gay?" And this is really interesting for a lot of reasons. The main one being that I was married to her dad. Like she was at our wedding, you know, like she was the flower girl. Like she knew my romantic like situation. And we were monogamous, we weren't open, like, so I was a little taken aback, but kids say stuff, and I don't even remember what I said. I didn't really know how to respond. And it was interesting. She asked me, I mean, I did internally sort of identify as queer or bi, but I wasn't loud about it. I didn't talk to her about it. It wasn't something I flaunted, and it wasn't how I self-identified. So I was really interested in this question she was asking me. There was one thing, though, which was that I had written a book almost 10 years earlier that was published in 2014 called Women. And that was about a relationship, based on a relationship I had with a woman, an older woman. But my stepdaughter hadn't read that book. Like, she knew about it. But it wasn't something, again, it preceded my time with her. Like, I didn't talk about it a lot. She hadn't read it. So, yeah, it was just pretty interesting, because usually the biggest sign of, like, heteronormativity is a woman being married to a man. So 2 months later, I had what I describe now as like an emotional freak accident is the only really way I know how to say it. For a while I was saying my life blew up, but it got tired. So it was more of an emotional freak accident where it came to light that my husband had actually been struggling with alcohol and drug and sex addiction while he had been on tour. And I'm not kidding when I say this happened overnight. So he had been living a double life of sorts. And you could also argue that I had been living a double life of sorts. When I was alone, I was watching like all queer shows. I was listening to King Princess and Muna and Boy Genius constantly. Everything I was taking in was queer. But things happened really quickly, and literally 3 weeks later, I got a new key to my apartment. I lost the car that we shared, and our apartment, and our dog, and our marriage, and I lost a lot, but I actually gained a lot more because I gained agency. And what was so interesting about those early days in my new apartment is that when you have like a life crisis, it actually catapults you into reality. And you're suddenly like really awake. Like you're like a toddler again. Like, I don't know, like the birds started to sound better and music sounded amazing and everything felt like new again. And I would wake up in the morning really happy and like blasting, you know, the former said bands, you know, Boy Genius and Muna and King Princess, and like dancing in the mirror and like things I hadn't done and didn't do when I was married. So I had gained all of this agency, and I hadn't consciously been looking for an exit from my marriage. But as soon as my husband kind of gave me an inch, I took like 10 miles and I moved really quickly. And I thought back to a workshop I had been teaching in Paris and a couple years earlier. And there were these two tables of students, and there was this one table that I was at. And I was the teacher, so, you know, I needed to sleep and I was working, so I left early. And on my way out, there was this other table, also my students. And everyone at that table was queer. And they were talking about these like heartbreaks and relationships and being gay and like they're coming out and all of these fun stories. They were having so much fun. And I remember walking away from that table and thinking like, I should be at that table. Like, why am I not at that table? So when I'm lost in life, I'm a writer and I go toward words and I look up lyrics and I read and I look up definitions of things. So for this prompt, I looked up the word itself, looking, and the definition was the state or form that something appears. So I think back to my stepdaughter asking me that question, and the way she came in the bathroom, like so confident, right? Like feeling so safe to ask me that. She made eye contact with me. It was intimate. She was just like, hey, what's up? When did you know you were gay? And I was like, so I really think, though I wasn't looking for the exit found me. An exit I didn't know I needed or wanted found me. And there were so many exits that I wanted on a subconscious level, which were exits from monogamy and from my marriage and from my repressed sexuality. But it wasn't until the right person at the right time asked me that question, because she was someone who didn't just look at me, but really, really saw me. So I go back to her question of, when did you know you were gay? And I think about all the different ways I could have answered it. And I feel like I've come up with 3 answers, and they would all be true. And one is, when did you know you were gay? Never. Another one is always. And another one is, or the final one is, I'm realizing it right now. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Chloe, for sharing that powerful story. I always describe Speakeasy as a bit of a literary mixtape. You never know what you're going to get next. And that means that sometimes we're going to make these transitions. We've gone from a deeply personal, profound story to a kind of, we're going to go now to a kind of national, global tragedy. So stick with us here. Our next speaker, Adam Higginbotham. He's a journalist who's written for the New Yorker, the New York Times Magazine, Smithsonian, GQ, Wired. He is the author of Midnight in Chernobyl, which is an amazing, gripping book about, you guessed it, Chernobyl, which has won the William E. Colby Award and the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction. And instead of picking something light and happy for his next book, his new book, which just come out, he's written about The Challenger, a true story of heroism and disaster on the edge of space, which is already an instant New York Times bestseller and it just came out 3 weeks ago. So please welcome Adam Higginbotham to the stage.
Hi. Well, I can't see anybody, so that's reassuring. Thank you for having me. At 11:38 a.m. on January the 28th, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off from Launch Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. 73 seconds into flight, it disintegrated in a cloud of blazing rocket fuel, and everyone on board was killed. The book that I wrote about what happened that morning is the second I've written about a technological catastrophe, and also the second dealing with something that happened in the first few months of 1986. This isn't because I have a ghoulish fascination with disasters, and certainly not because I have any wish to endlessly relive the year I turned 18. But one thing the events have in common is the opportunity they present to examine human nature at its best and its worst. The stories of Chernobyl and Challenger are full of heroes and villains. People are both precipitated and reacted to what happened in often startling ways, and others who tried to stand in the way of disaster and suffered the consequences for the rest of their lives. Tonight, I want to tell you a story about one of those people, a rocket engineer named Roger Beaujolais, and how I came to learn about what happened to him. When I first began to think about writing about Challenger at the end of 2019, I realized that what I remembered about the accident and the way I remembered it was only a fraction of the story. I remembered Krista McAuliffe, I remembered the cold weather, and I remembered the O-rings. But I didn't really know very much about the other 6 members of the crew, or what had brought them to the launch pad that day. And I knew nothing at all about the senior managers at NASA who had effectively sent the crew to their deaths, or the engineers like Roger Beaujolais, who worked at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the booster rockets that caused the accident. Beaujolais was one of a handful of engineers at Thiokol who had been worried for months about problems with the seals in the rockets, the O-rings. And the night before Challenger launched, called a last-minute meeting with their bosses at NASA to try to stop the countdown. Beaujolais insisted that if they launched in cold weather, there was a strong chance that the O-rings would fail and all the astronauts would be killed. And although I knew that Roger was a central protagonist in the story, he had died in 2012. I had very little information about who he was or where he'd come from. One of the first things I did when I started my research was call Joe Trento, who was a retired CNN correspondent who'd written a book about Challenger published in the immediate aftermath of the accident in 1987. Joe had interviewed almost all of the senior managers at NASA and had made the decision to launch Challenger, but many of whom had died long ago. I wanted to ask Joe if he still had the transcripts of those conversations, but when I got him on the phone, Joe said, well, no, I don't, because I've donated everything I had to the archives of the National Air and Space Museum in Chantilly, Virginia. But if you call them, I'm sure they'll let you see them. So I emailed the archives of the National Air and Space Museum in Chantilly, Virginia, and I asked about Joe's papers. The archivist wrote straight back and said, sure, you can come and take a look at them as soon as we reopen. By now, it was October 2020, and the reading rooms of every federal archive in the country had closed down because of COVID-19. 2 years later, I finally managed to get an appointment to visit. But before I went, I called to find out how long they thought I would need to go through the transcripts. The archivist kindly pulled the boxes and told me there were just 3 cartons and a few files of transcripts. If you come down for 2 days, that should be fine. And when I got down there, I could see she was absolutely right. There wasn't much there at all, a handful of flimsy pages printed out in dot matrix type more than 30 years ago. The ink of much of it so faded as to be almost illegible. I was finished in a few hours. So I had a whole day left. But then I'm bearing in mind Robert Caro's famous dictum, turn every page. So I sat down and laboriously began going through every single document in the remainder of the 3 boxes. Then, halfway through day 2, right at the end of one box, I found a small padded envelope. Inside it was a transparent jewel case containing an unmarked CD. Now, this disc was from sometime in the 90s, so at least 20 years old. The likelihood of there being anything useful on it, or even it being in a format that was readable in the 21st century, seemed slim at best. But I thought it was worth a try, so I went to the archivist and I said, Elizabeth, this is probably a total waste of time, but you think you could have a look at this and see if there's anything recoverable in it? And she said, sure. Why don't you go to lunch, I'll hand it over to the IT guys, and we'll see what we can do. So I went to the museum cafeteria, got myself a sandwich, came back half an hour later. And when I came back, I said, Elizabeth, don't suppose there was any luck with that CD? And she said, oh yeah, go down to that computer at the end of the room. We pulled something off it you might be interested in. So I went and sat down, and on the screen was a Word document. It was 600 pages long. And it was not what I'd been looking for at all. It was a memoir written by Roger Beaujolais, finished in 1999 and never published. It turns out that Beaujolais had been a pack rat and had kept every scrap of paper related to his career at Morton Thiokol and the Challenger accident. And when he left work at the company, he stuffed his Toyota Celica with 14 cardboard boxes filled with company memos and test reports, and his own engineering logbooks, a day-by-day diary of everything he had done at work and how he felt about it. He used this material to write a book in which he described himself as a raging introvert, a man who had spent his entire life dedicated to engineering. He wrote about how he had arrived at Thiokol at the beginning of the space shuttle program and eventually learned more about the joints in the solid rockets than anyone else at the company. He described witnessing 4 years of shuttle launches and seeing signs of damage in the rubber rings that sealed the joints of the rocket get worse and worse. He wrote about how he had spent months trying to persuade his bosses at Thiokol to take the problem seriously and do something about it before it was too late. And he described that teleconference the night before the launch and how desperate he was to have the launch stopped. But he also revealed exactly why he felt so determined to stop the Challenger countdown going ahead. It was because he understood the personal consequences of not doing so better than anyone else in the room. A dozen years earlier, Beaujolais had been working at Rockwell International in California, a company that he described as being at the time the armpit of the aerospace industry, where he was helping to build what would ultimately become the crew compartment of the space shuttle. One day in 1974, Beaujolais found himself getting into an argument with a normally mild-mannered colleague from the structural design department. The argument eventually became so heated that Beaujolais was worried that they would come to blows, and afterwards he was so upset by what had happened that he went to his supervisor to find out what the story was. And his supervisor said, "Haven't you heard?" Then he explained that before coming to Rockwell, the other engineer had worked on the design of a new jumbo jet, the DC-10. Specifically, he had been assigned to the plane's cargo bay door design. But as time went by, he became concerned that there was a fault with the design, making it possible for the door to come open unexpectedly in flight. He appealed to his bosses to fix the problem, but they wouldn't listen. Eventually, he became so concerned that he went to the FAA and asked them to refuse to certify the aircraft design until it was fixed. But they wouldn't listen either, and the DC-10 went into service just as it was. 3 years after that, in March 1974, a DC-10 operated by Turkish Airlines, Flight 981, took off from Orly Airport in Paris with a full complement of passengers and crew bound for London. It was just 9 minutes into flight, at a height of around 11,500 feet, when the rear cargo door came open. An explosive decompression severed the cables connecting the cockpit to the engines and the control surfaces, and the plane plunged into a forest in rural France at nearly 500 miles an hour. There were no survivors. It was, at the time, the deadliest crash in civil aviation history. Afterwards, Beaujolais' colleague was medicated to cope with the trauma of what happened, but he remained tortured by his failure to stop an accident he knew was inevitable. And he felt personally responsible for the deaths of 346 men, women, and children. Roger Beaujolais left Rockwell not long after that, but he swore that wherever he worked from that point onwards, he would never allow himself to be put in the same position as that engineer. The night before the Challenger launch, Beaujolais at first succeeded in persuading his bosses at Morton Thiokol to tell NASA that they would not recommend the countdown proceed. It was a no-go for launch. But NASA managers said his argument about the O-rings and the cold weather was inconclusive. He didn't have the data. It was just a hunch. And they made it clear that they wanted to go ahead with the launch regardless. One of them said, "My God, Thiokol, when do you expect me to launch? Next April?" At that, Beaujolais felt his stomach lurch. He remembered Flight 981. He tried everything he could to stop his bosses buckling under the pressure. He picked up a handful of glossy photographs showing the damage to the O-rings the last time the shuttle had launched in such cold weather. He slapped them down on the table in front of his managers to get their attention, but they ignored him. He lost his composure completely and began screaming at them at the top of his voice. He began to fear that he would be fired on the spot. But they still wouldn't listen. In the end, he fell silent and went back to his seat. Then he watched one by one as the 4 men changed their launch recommendation from no-go to go. When he heard that, Beaujolais was terrified that they had just taken the decision to kill 7 astronauts. As he left the room that night, his colleagues tried to tell him that he had done everything he could. And although he hoped for the best, he still feared the worst. The next morning, he reluctantly sat down on the floor of the Thiokol conference room to watch the launch take place live on television. And as the terminal countdown began, he reached out to the man sitting next to him and held his hand.
Thank you, Adam Higginbotham, everyone. Next up is our quiz, where you all see how clever and literate and literary you all are. The name of the game is Tip of My Tongue. You're going to have 3 passages read out to you. You have to guess the author and the name of the work. And the work could be a poem, a novel, a song, something that's written by someone, has an author. No phones, please, no AI. Just let's keep it in the here and now, all right? And we have an amazing quiz master for you. Oh, sorry, and the winner of the quiz goes away with this beautiful book bag with books signed by all of our amazing authors tonight. Okay, any questions? You ready? The quiz sheets are on your table. Okay, our quiz master today is Rebecca Keith, who is a writer of poetry and fiction and essays that have appeared on WNYC, in The Narrative, in Rumpus, in The Best New Poets. She also sings and plays guitar and keyboards with her 2 bands, The Roulettes and Little Hustle. And last, but certainly not least, Rebecca is an English teacher and one of our teaching partners at the Williamsburg High School of Arts and Technology. And we're thrilled to have her up here. Yes. We just hosted a multi-week storytelling program with her, and we're thrilled to have her up here on this stage tonight. So please welcome Rebecca Keith for the quiz. Sorry. There's going to be a short video about what we do first. And then Rebecca Keith will be up on stage. Thank you all.
This program is different because we really developed it with House of SpeakEasy. Partnership with House of SpeakEasy matters because I love bringing in writers who can bring their own perspectives and really help students find a new way to tell their stories.
I was talking to him a lot about what it means to be a professional writer. And I realized a lot of my imagining of this started in this environment. To be able to come back and let them know on the other side what I have learned, and also what I do not want them to lose as they're developing this love for it was important for me.
The performance aspect is really special.
Yeah, this was really fun. I really liked this. I feel like my favorite part was trying to find out how I was going to connect it to the theme. Trying to find different things that I could relate to and seeing which one works best for me. I like what we're doing here, yeah.
It was pretty good because she was able to help me edit, and it became the poem that I read today. I feel pretty proud of it because it lets me express myself and to show people who I really am.
My piece, it was pretty personal. I was going through a hard time with my father. When I suggested it, they were like, oh, it's really good. And I was like, really? I should really do this. And when I performed it, everybody clapped, so it really made me feel better about putting it out there.
So I think what makes the House of SpeakEasy particularly special is the focusing on storytelling. The House of SpeakEasy gives a wider range of opportunity for the students.
Getting to motivate kids to come out of their shells, it can be really beautiful when that happens.
All right. So, we ready? Okay. Quote 1. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. And one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. All right. I'll wait. Okay. Quote 2. We ready? You got a fast car. I want a ticket to anywhere. Maybe we make a deal. Maybe together we can get somewhere. Any place is better.
Starting from zero, got nothing to lose. Maybe we'll make something. Me, myself, I got nothing to prove. Okay, everyone should get that one, right? And last but not least, quote 3. What I've found does the most good is to just get into a taxi and go to Tiffany's. It calms me down right away. The quietness and the proud look of it. Nothing very bad could happen to you there. Not with those kind men in their nice suits and that lovely smell of silver and alligator wallets. Good luck. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to have a 10-minute break, and then I will be back to lead the second half. See you in 10 minutes. Woo! just so you know, there's been a preliminary look at the cards that you filled out, and some of you are geniuses, and others of you, well, never mind. Okay, so now, but welcome back. Actually, yes, here is your chance, the rest of you, to get an education. Huh, who knew? So, our third speaker tonight, to those of you who watch HBO, now called Max, my dog's name, thank you for that shout out to HBO. I was touched, actually, very touched. You will have seen him in Insecure. I know. Oh, yes. But he is not just an accomplished actor. No. Nor is he just a noted philanthropist, which indeed he is. What I really admire about him is that he is an entrepreneur as well. An entrepreneur who has started his own Pilates studios. No, this is like amazing. This is amazing stuff here. These studios, he started out in Louisiana, all across vampire country. But now he's opening up his first one in Los Angeles in a few weeks. So those of you who are flying out to LA, look out for Sweaty. That is the name of the Pilates studios. So, I should tell you his name because I know you're hanging on my every word here, of course. So, of course, I am talking about the incomparable, the just amazingly and fascinatingly superb writer, J. Ellis. But his new book, which is coming out, yes, imminently, is called Did Everyone Have an Imaginary Friend or Just Me? Just you, Jay. It's coming out next month, but he's on hand to sign book plates so that when it does come out, you can put his signature and best wishes on the book plate in the book. But this is Jay in his own words. He says, I get inspiration from everything. Every bad decision I've made, places I've lived, every song I've listened to or movie I've watched, the people in and out of my life, the frigid cold air of winter and the sweltering humid nights of summer. To me, inspiration is all around if you want to see it. Hey, Jay, you're my inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, Jay Ellis. Woo!
Thank you. Would anyone like to do some Pilates with me? Just stretch out. Don't hit the person next to you. Be careful. By round of applause, did anyone in here have an imaginary friend growing up? Shout out to my fellow nerds. I'm not alone up here. I had an imaginary friend. His name was Mikey when I was growing up, and he came to me in a storm. We were living in Tampa, Florida at the time, and my corn syrup-fueled imagination had me believing that there were crocodiles around my bed, and I was terrified to run to my parents' room for safety. And in a moment of fear and snapping crocodile teeth, Mikey popped over my shoulder and he said, oh, hell no, I ain't about to be no alligator's dinner. And I looked back up at Mikey and I said, where'd you come from? And he said, I've been here this whole time. And I said, oh, well, what's your name? And he said, Mikey, duh. And from then on, we were best friends. That's all it took. And we went on all kinds of adventures together. He played Cyrano for me in 3rd grade when he told me to staple the webbing of my hand so I could sit in the chair next to my 3rd grade teacher, profess my love to her, and tell her that I was the man that she needed to spend her life with. It's my first heartbreak. A little bit later, we saw Boys in the Hood in the theater the summer that it came out. And before we went in the theater, Mikey said he had bubble guts. Well, about an hour and 20 minutes into the movie, just after the character Ricky gets killed, the 2 rival gangs who were in the theater started fighting and shooting, and the police were also there, and we had to crawl out through the melee of this violence. And when we got back in the car, after my aunt helped us figure out how to get there. When we got back in the car, Mikey said, I knew I had bubble guts for a reason. And that was Mikey's intuition. It was his body's way of telling him something wasn't right. In 4th grade, I moved to a new school in Austin, Texas, and I decided that I wanted to perfect this persona of Ramon, which is my middle name. It's very confusing. We are not Latin at all in my family. But I had to roll the R's. And Mikey guided me through Univision and some Spanish radio. And he helped me figure out how to use my Spanish on the bus with a bunch of kids at my new school where 85% of the student body spoke Spanish as a first language. I failed miserably. But when Mikey left my life a little bit later on, I was prepared. By the time I got to middle school, I was out here in these angsty middle school streets thriving until I decided I wanted to join a gang. Now, at the time, I was in 7th grade, and I was living in South Tulsa, and I would get bused to North Tulsa every single day, and it was about a 52-minute bus ride. And every single week, without fail, surfer bro Eric would come up to me and give me a 52-minute Q&A about what he did not understand on the previous night's In Living Color episode. Why doesn't Wanda want you to touch her hair? And I don't get why homie doesn't play that, and you never will, Eric. And on this Monday, the week I decided to join a gang, about 20 minutes into my ride, Eric approached me, and he said, hey, do all black people... Shut the fuck up, Eric! It came out of my mouth so fast, guys, I didn't even know that I said it. And Eric had this incredulous look on his face, and within a second, I was standing above him, and my fist was raised so high, and he was pinned down. It was like I was in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. And so I was raised so high, and in one of the rare instances that my bus driver realized that he had students on the bus, he jerked the bus to a stop, and he said, hey, sit down before I kick your asses off the bus, you indignants. To this day, I'm not sure if indignants is a word. But like roaches in the light, we all ran to our seats. Some of the kids who came to watch, we scattered and we sat in our seats. And we pulled up to school that morning. There were some boys who were standing on the front steps, and they were kind of dissing each other, kind of ragging on each other is what we called it back then. And Jamar was one of those kids. He was a 7th grader like me, and Jamar, rest in peace, was this all bark, no bite, drunk, loud uncle at a spades game, except he was 13 years old. And Jamar was in a very heated yo mama debate with 2 8th graders who were dressed head to toe in baby blue. Hey, yo mama's so fat though, she wear a VCR for a pager. Yeah, but she gave it to yo mama last night, and I used it to beep her before I came over and hit that. So you can call me daddy, son. Real quick, guys, 2 things. A, no kid ever wants to know that their classmate hit that in reference to their mom. And B, no kid ever wants to call their classmate daddy. Things escalated very quickly, as you could imagine. And these 3 boys, these 2 8th graders and Jamar, they decided very amicably, as 8th graders often do, that they were gonna fight after school. And I had to see this. Maybe there was something that I could use to get Eric off my back so he would leave me alone for this bus ride. So after school, we all gathered around and we waited for the fight. Don King would have been proud. And then he would have charged us $49.99. Only in America. And the fight didn't last long. Jamar got his ass kicked, but that's not really what's important. He's not important here. What was important is that I realized that I needed what these 2 baby blue homeboys had with each other. I needed someone to have my back in the same way. So on Tuesday, I was sitting in the lunchroom with 2 good friends of mine, Samson and Elijah, and I tell them my plan, and they didn't like it at all. Samson yelled, "You stupid, you don't even look right in the gang. Your jeans is faded, what's wrong with you?" And I was like, what? That doesn't even make sense. Bro, you're not built for a gang. Psh. whatever, y'all don't know what y'all talking about. On Wednesday, once I realized that Samson and Elijah were no help, I decided that I would use my alphabetical seating assignment in my math class to ask Antoine Griffin if I could join. See, Antoine Griffin was the crown prince of my middle school. He floated, literally. It was the most magical thing you've ever seen in your life. He had a fresh cut like a barber lived at his house. He was always draped in baby blue, and he wore gold chains like he robbed Mansa Musa's tomb. So I leaned over to Antoine and I said, hey, Antoine, I want to be like you. I want to be in the G-A-N-G. I was very smooth. And Antoine looked at me with a smile on his face and he said, cool, I got you. And so later that day, while I was in gym class, somewhere between jumping rope and climbing a rope for our physical fitness test, I told Samson and Elijah that Antoine said I was good. And they didn't like it. You know you got to trade in your Supersonics jacket for something baby blue. What? Nuh-uh, I ain't got to do that. This is exactly why you're not supposed to be in a gang. You're not built for a gang. You know you could back out, Elijah said, his voice booming. He put his arm around me like he was Morgan Freeman and leaned on me. It's not too late, son. And then Samson jumped in one more time and he said, listen, man, you can get out of this. You haven't been jumped in yet. Like, you can make a decision. But I had a wedgie from my purple gym shorts that was so deep, I didn't hear anything that they said. And there was a very important piece of information there. I imagine you guys know what it is. So on Thursday, I sat in science class, and Mercedes, who was the school gossip, leaned over while we were dissecting a piglet. And she said, hey, I heard you gonna get jumped in the neighborhoods. And I said, what? Jumped in what? And she was like, you don't know? No, I don't. Well, you gotta get jumped in the neighborhoods. By who? The entire class gasped, and I could see them grab at their imaginary gold rope chains. You get jumped in by the hoods. That's the last step. And in my mind, every single kid was just grinning and smiling and rubbing their hands together to see this Coliseum-like ass whooping that I was about to get. And all I could do was stare down at this piglet, thinking of my own fate. On Friday, I picked out my clothes for school. And I thought to myself, what has baby blue? What has extra padding? What did I want my mother and father to see me in at the hospital? And were any of my underwear not white, just in case? And when I got back on the bus that morning, I was reminded why I went on this kamikaze mission. Surfer bro Eric, he popped up over the seat and he said, hey, I just want to say that I've been thinking about it all week, and I just want to say I'm sorry. I think our fight was my fault, and I want to say I'm sorry. And I just want to make sure we're good because, I know what, Eric? I know you're in a gang now, and I don't want to get beat up by your homeboys. And that was it. It worked. Just by joining this gang, I got Eric off my back. It was the most amazing thing, but I still had to dodge getting jumped in the gang. So luckily, we got to school about 20 minutes late. So I dodged a before-school ass whooping. And I spent the rest of my day double-taking my shadow everywhere I went. I walked as fast as I could in and out of class. In the cafeteria, I sat with my back to the wall so I could see everyone coming in and coming out. In gym, I lied and said I forgot my shorts at home so I didn't get caught slipping in the locker room. We've all seen the movies, kids fight in the locker room. By the end of the day, I had circumvented every possible in-school ass-whooping scenario. I was proud of myself. I floated through the hallways like I was in a chariot at the Coliseum. Maximus Ellis, emperor of all the hoods. And as I walked out of school, I bumped into Antoine, and he said, hey, yo, we're going to meet up at the homeboy's house tomorrow. You should come through. Just hit me on the sidekick. He had a sidekick in 7th grade. What? This was 1997, guys. This is crazy. I said, cool, I'll be there. And as I walked down the stairs, the sun hit my face, and I closed my eyes and enjoyed this moment. The sun just danced across my face, and my two-step with the sun was broken up by a fist, and then another fist, and another fist, and another fist. And I ended up on the ground, which is how most jumping in of the gangs goes, if you guys don't know. That's how it goes. And I remember in one of my conversations when I told Samson and Elijah that I joined, they said, fight back. And so I popped up and I just started swinging and just started swinging. And I knew that I was landing a few punches because the boys only got madder and hit harder and kicked harder, and I ended up on the ground again. And while I was on the ground and my eyes were closed and I was just absorbing all these blows, I swear I heard Master P say, make them say, na, 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 na. And the security guard, who I'm still to this day 1,000% positive was in on it, judging by how long it took him to blow his whistle, he finally blew the whistle and the boys ran off. And Samson walked over and he stood over me looking down at my face, and he said what every middle school boy said back then after a fight. You just got knocked the fuck out. I stood up and I limped my way to the bus. And I got on the bus and I collapsed in a seat, and a smile spread across my face. I made it. I did it. I got jumped in. I'm still standing. Thank you. I'm proud of myself too, actually. The next morning was Saturday, and my parents would usually start the day singing and dancing their way through my dad's record collection. And while they were busy remembering what it was like in September, they didn't realize that I had a busted lip until my mom sat down at the table for breakfast. And when she asked about it, I said, oh, it was a flag football accident. And I quickly needed to change the subject because my mother, God bless her, she's a detective, guys. And so I said, hey, can you take me to my friend's house? And she said, what friends? My friends from school. To do what? To hang out? Which friends? Just a couple of them. My mom rolled her eyes, sucked her teeth. She looked over her shoulder. Your son in here being smart, talking about he want to hang out with some friends. Yelling to my dad in the other room. My dad yells back, he got friends? That's what he say. Y'all know I'm right here, right? My mom looked at me over her glasses. Mm-hmm. By the end of that day, going into the night, they still hadn't budged. So I was at home moping and pissed off that I wasn't with my goons, my posse, my comrades. I'm still not sure what you actually say. I wasn't built for gangs. And on the other side of town, Antoine and all the boys had gotten together. And one of the boys decided to bring a gun. And they were going to do some initiation work. There was another guy who had recently gotten jumped in. His name was Fred. And they told Fred, you got to play Russian roulette. This is the last bit of your initiation. And so, excuse me. The boys, after a couple of rounds, all joked that the gun wasn't loaded. I bet that shit's not even loaded. And then Fred picked up the gun, squeezed the trigger, and blew a hole through his ear and out the side of his head. He was 14 years old. The next morning on the news, a picture so tiny, so quickly flashed on the local news. And I sat there in shock. I didn't know what to do. I was numb. I was heartbroken. I knew Fred. We played basketball together. We sat next to each other on the bus going to Bartlesville to see the only hotel that Frank Lloyd Wright ever built. It's in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And I was numb. I spent the day not knowing what to do. Should I do my homework? Should I watch football with my dad? And then that got me thinking about my parents. And my parents didn't know where I was asking them to take me the next day. They didn't know that I had foolishly joined a gang earlier in that week. They didn't know that the young man who was on the news who had gotten killed went to my school. And even more, they didn't know that he was in the same gang as me. And in that moment, I realized it'd be better if they never did. So I went to my room and I grabbed my Space Jam Trapper Keeper. tiptoed to the phone hanging on the wall in the kitchen. And I sat there for a second. I had the phone in one hand. I had a phone number in the other hand, but I didn't know what to say. And I couldn't think of anything that didn't sound ridiculous. Everything that came to my mind didn't acknowledge the gravity of the tragedy and the situation. And so instead of scripting it, I just called. And I waited while it rang. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. And I thought, I'm out. I don't have to have this conversation. And on the 4th ring, Antoine picked up. Yo, what's good? Hey, it's Dub. What's good? Shit. I just got back from the police station. You lucky you ain't come last night. And those words just hung there. It felt like an eternity. And all I could say was, I'm out. And I hung up the phone, and I hoped I never had to have a conversation about that week ever again in my life. See, when Mikey was around when I was a kid, he didn't need anything from me to be my friend or to have my back. And I didn't need a gang. I actually had Samson and Elijah, who were my boys and were helping me out, even though I wanted to go swinging blindly into this gang. Mikey, much like Samson and Elijah, just wanted me to show up and unapologetically be myself and not look for the easiest exit. Thank you.
Okay, one more time. Let's hear it for Jay Ellis. Woo! So, it is now the season finale. Yes, this is it. This is our last few minutes together until we take a break for the summer and come back in September. And our closer tonight is somebody I truly admire and have admired his writing for many, many years. He's the author of many books, so I'm just going to give you a couple. He's the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Modern Romance, and most recently, 2020, One City, 7 People, and the Year Everything Changed. Now, Eric Klinenberg is currently the Helen Gould Shepherd Professor in Social Sciences and the Director of the Institute for Public Knowledge at NYU. But the reason why I have always admired him so much is because he is a philosopher at heart. He has a sense of the existence, the meaning of existence in the existential. And to give you a sense of what that means, I'm just going to quote him in his own words. One of the most important things I've learned as a sociologist is that while we all make choices, we don't get to choose the choices we have to choose from. That, he says, is what is always in the forefront of his mind when he writes. Ladies and gentlemen, our resident philosopher, Eric Klinenberg. Woo!
All right, the season finale. And can we give it up for the producers of this amazing night? What an amazing thing. And look, we could all admit it's a bit of a cliche to end the season with the NYU sociologist. Could have been Jay Ellis, the star of the HBO hit show Pilates Entrepreneur. But why would we go in that direction when we have a sociologist around the corner could close the whole fucking year for us? And just to raise the degree of difficulty a little bit, let's invite him to talk about the year 2020. The best of times. So we have about 13 minutes together before the next show comes in. And I want to ask you to just get your mind back to 2020. Anyone remember 2020 here? Worked so hard to keep 2020 out of our minds. But just because we're here, remember, like, anyone seen the TV show Mad Men, that first scene where they're just the opening credits and everyone's just kind of spinning in a vortex, falling into nothing? You know that thing I'm talking about? That's kind of what 2020 felt like to me. The fear, the uncertainty, that sense that the bottom had fallen out. And I said, as that was happening, the way I'm going to get my grip on this year and figure things out is I'm just going to stop and talk to people and figure out how other people are getting through the year. And I talked to this guy named Ben Beer, who was in his residency training as a cardiologist at Mount Sinai at the time. And his wife had a really serious advanced cancer, which she was being treated for just as 2020 started. So she was immunocompromised. And he said this profound thing to me. He said, the thing that made 2020, the thing that made that time so complicated is that breathing, the fundamental chemistry of the world, right? The thing that connects us to where we are, right? You breathe in, you take a place in. You breathe out, you put something back into the world. And he said, breathing, the thing that we need to keep ourselves alive, suddenly became the thing that was most likely to do us in. And in a way, what happened in 2020 is our whole system was taken off, right? Because this fundamental part of our chemistry was wrong, and the way we lived and inhabited space and engaged each other was different. I remember really profoundly, 2020 began for me, I had what was supposed to be the night of my life. Cuyahoga County, anyone from Cuyahoga County, Cleveland here tonight? Thank you, Cleveland. So look, when you're an author, you go where they invite you, all right? Sometimes it's around the corner to the public theater. Sometimes it's Cuyahoga County. I'd written this book, and you ever hear about these things where they have like one city, one book? People, that was me that night in Cuyahoga County. How about, could you do it on March 9th, 2020? That sounded fucking amazing in 2019. And like on March 6th, I went to the CVS on 6th Avenue and 11th Street. I know I've seen some of you there. And there was nothing on the shelf. You couldn't even get a zinc lozenge at the CVS in 2020. And I called the people in Cleveland. I was like, should I come? And they said, there's no COVID in Cleveland. It's fine. You should come. And I hear you laughing, but listen, there were 2,500 people bought tickets to see me talk about my book. Jay Ellis was not even going to be there that night. Okay? Jay Ellis nobody even knew about Jay Ellis in Cuyahoga County. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to fly to Cuyahoga County. And I went, and I remember getting on the plane, right? And the breathing was hard, and nobody was on the plane. I switched the flight. I was on like the 7 a.m. to Cleveland from LaGuardia. There's probably never anybody on that flight, but there was definitely nobody on that flight that morning. And I got to the hotel, and I was, just as I got there, like the list on the radio is like, they found the first 3 cases of COVID in Ohio. It's because it's the first time they actually tested anybody in Ohio. And the people at the front desk, like, I've never seen anyone so happy to check me into a hotel. They're like, you're the only guest here tonight. The stock market crashed 1,400 points that day. And 2,500 people turned into 300. The upside was that they made these little cookies with the cover of my book on it, and I have tons of them. After the show, if anyone wants a cookie with my last book, I've got a bunch of them. So I did the night. I flew home, and I am in the taxi coming back to New York, and my mother-in-law, who's here in the audience tonight, calls me and she said, "Hey, listen, your son has a fever." All right? So I race home, and my son's got a fever, and it turns out, like, he's sick. And this is a kid, he's 13 years old at the time, boundless energy, never gets tired, does everything, running around all the time. And I'm telling you, like, for 10 days, night sweats, exhausted, like the shivers, stomach hurts. And did anyone here remember the advice that we got from the government at the time? Like, here's what you're supposed to do. If someone in your home might have COVID, and by the way, you can't know because you were living in the United States of America, which didn't have tests, right? You remember that time? You didn't know. Do you have COVID? Who knows? Do you want to go to the hospital? No, thank you. Here's what you're supposed to do. Here's what they wanted you to do. If someone in your home has has COVID, put them in their room, isolate them, and you could just like slide food under the door, right? Anyone here have kids? Any parents in the room? Just curious, okay? Can you imagine that advice? Oh, sorry, honey, I'm gonna stay out here 6 feet. You know, you tough it out in there. No, of course, so you go in there, and you're there, and breathing becomes fraught. And the truth is, I don't know how you're feeling these days, but I hear this expression, long COVID, all the time, as a medical condition, and it's a real thing. You know, long COVID, probably many of you in the room have experienced it. You know, someone in your world has. If it's not you, it's real. But what I came to realize in working on this book and writing and talking to people is long COVID's not just a medical condition, it's also a social disease. And in a weird way, we're still in 2020, right? We still haven't found the exit. If you don't believe me, look at who you're voting for president in November. So the idea that's driven a lot of my career is that crises have a way of revealing things. If you look closely at what happens to a society during a crisis, you can learn who we are, what we value, whose lives matter, right? All sorts of things pop up. Like, anybody remember essential workers? Anyone here remember essential workers? Yeah? You've all been talking about essential workers nonstop since 2020, right? Right? The fate of the essential workers? No? Nobody? Nobody's talking about essential workers. Can we stop for a second and think about what happened in 2020? Everything was falling apart. The economy collapsed. We didn't know who was going to live and who was going to die. Our schools closed down. We couldn't go to work, right? We closed bars, restaurants, and everything. We said the government said the only people who should still go to work these days are essential workers, right? We came up with this new category. There's some people, some work, and some workers are just more important than the rest of us. And we live in New York City. We know who the essential workers are, right? They're the finance guys. They're the lawyers. I was going to say the Knicks, but it ended badly this year. It was a good year for the Knicks. But no, that's not who the essential workers were at all. And we kind of know that. Like, it was like we spoke the open secret. Who are the essential workers in the society, right? It's the people who are making food, who are serving food, farm workers, people working in poultry plants. Of course, the medical workers and doctors, nurses, custodians, people who maintain our infrastructure, the bus drivers, the clerks, right? It's disproportionately black, disproportionately Latino, low-wage workers. Those are the people we depend on for society to function. And the thing that happened, right? Let's give it up to those people, the essential workers. And we should give it up to them because basically what we did in 2020 is we gave them the finger. What do I mean? To be called essential in America in 2020 was to be deemed expendable, right? What you'd think at a society that says some people are essential would say, okay, you get the best available health care. You get PPE, right? You get you get a bonus. You get some extra compensation. You get a thank you. What happened in 2020? It's like we walked to the edge of this moral precipice. It felt like there was going to be this breakthrough. Remember, there were these moments when it looked like maybe we're going to have a different society. Anybody have the neoliberalism is dead conversation in 2020? Right? It looked like, no. We got to the edge of the moral precipice, and we were like, nah, forget about it. Let's see if we can get those Biden and Trump people to run against each other again. But not all of us. Here's how we're going to end the season of the House of SpeakEasy. When I was doing my research, I tried to tell a story about somebody from every borough in New York City. I went deep to try to follow someone from every borough of New York. The person whose story I want to end our season with tonight is a woman named Nuala O'Doherty, who's from Jackson Heights, Queens. We have Queens tonight? Queens in the house? Okay. Nobody from Cuyahoga County. Queens is in the house. So Nuala O'Doherty spent 29 years working as a district attorney in Manhattan. She's a child of an Irish immigrant family. She's the only person born in the United States. They moved to New York when she was in high school. She went to St. John's for law school. She moved to Astoria. She married an Ecuadorian guy she met at a bodega. He's an auto technician. They got married. They moved to Jackson Heights, had kids, bought a house. She had her career. She retired in 2019, decided she wanted to dedicate herself to public service. She ran a shitty campaign for a super local office. Things were falling apart, but in the beginning of 2020, she noticed that there was COVID in her neighborhood. And she got worried about it because she thought, like, who's going to be affected by COVID? The people who lived in Jackson Heights, right? Why? A, they're essential workers. B, they live in crowded apartments with a lot of other people, right? They're likely to bring the disease home when they get it. And there are a lot of people who are part of the cash economy who are going to lose their jobs, who are going to be in trouble. She thought things are going to get tough here. So even though her campaign was falling apart, she said, I am going to try to help our neighborhood. She got a Post-it note. She wrote, if you need help, call me. And she put her phone number on it. She had her kids make some Xerox copies. She posted them around the neighborhood. The next day, she had so many phone calls, she didn't know what to do. So then she came up with another idea. She said, on a Post-it note, if you can give help, call me. Dozens of people called the next day too. So what Nuala started in Jackson Heights, Queens, is the thing that's going to get us out of this. Not just get us out of 2020, but get us out of this right now. She started something we call now a mutual aid network. Anyone participated in mutual aid projects in 2020, right? So when we talk about 2020, we talk about all the shit that went down in 2020. It's usually a bad story for good reason. But another thing happened in 2020 that I want us to end this season with, which is people across New York, around the United States, in fact, around the world, got together and formed these mutual aid networks. If you can help someone, we do. Before long, Nuala had started an organization with her neighbors called the COVID Care Neighborhood Network. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people wound up getting help. Food, diapers, pharmaceuticals, cleaning supplies, support, assistance getting to the doctor, assistance getting vaccinated, help with housing when landlords tried to evict you even though it was against the law. And on it went. It was an amazing thing what happened in the most hard-hit part of New York City, right? This part of Queens. Incredible what people did in neighborhood networks across the country. And I know that if you're like me at all, you spend a lot of time talking about how individualism and its excesses is killing America, how selfishness is killing America, how we don't do enough, nobody cares about each other, and most of that shit's true. But don't forget there's this other part of this country and this city, which is when we can help each other, we do. The COVID Care Network grew and grew. In fact, after the worst part of COVID subsided, they started the 34th Avenue Open Street Coalition. They got a whole avenue opened up because this area that's a green desert needed a place where people could go. Last thing I want to tell you. My book was coming out a few weeks ago. I was doing an excerpt about Nuala in New York Magazine. The editor said, before we publish this thing, it's a little bit, it's about a few years ago, could you just call Nuala and find out what's going on? And so I called Nuala and I was like, hey, Nuala, you're checking in. I'm going to write this piece about you for a magazine. Anything new happening? And she said, oh, yeah, Eric, you know how I'm married to this Ecuadorian guy, right? It's like, Nuala, there's a whole fucking chapter about you in my book. And I know you're married to an Ecuadorian guy. And she said, okay, well, he's got a cousin whose cousin's friend is one of those new migrants to New York City. And she really needs help. She's got to file her paperwork to get asylum because once she does it, she can go in to get a Social Security card, and she's got to get integrated. Could you talk to her? So Nuala says, I don't know anything about this law, but of course I will. She does. At the end of the conversation, which lasts 3 hours, the girl says, hey, listen, that was so helpful. Do you mind if I give your number to a friend? A week later, at 3 in the morning, there's so many people sleeping on cardboard outside of Nuala's house that she realizes she has to do something. And today, the same basement in Jackson Heights where Nuala lives, the same basement that was the operations center for the COVID Care Neighborhood Network in 2020, is the Jackson Heights Immigration Center, and thousands of families have filed their paperwork to become American citizens or American workers in that basement because one group of neighbors decided to do something. Let me tell you something. This is going to be a hard year, 2020-24. 2024 is going to be a hard year. But the way we make it less like 2020 and more like the future that we want to live in is we all try to do something like Nuala O'Doherty and her neighbors in Jackson Heights. Season's over, everybody. Thank you very much.
What a great positive note to end on. Thank you, Eric, and a big thank you to all of our amazing speakers tonight. Another big round of applause for all of them, please.
Okay, geniuses. Lucas is going to pick the winner because actually there were quite a few, so well done, everybody. So first of all, the answers, right? Number 1, Shakespeare's... No! As You Like It. Oh my God. Never mind. We'll try again. Okay, the next one. Fast Car, written by... Yes! Okay, well done. And finally, the third one. Don't let me down here. The third one was Breakfast at... by... Yes! Well done, everyone. Okay, Lucas, you are ready.
Only one can go home with the prize, I'm afraid to say, and that person, that one, is Ken George. Well done, Ken. After the show, please meet us at the front to collect your book bag. All of our authors will be outside signing their books as you exit. Thank you all for being an amazing audience. Thank you all for a great, great season. Everyone have a great summer looking for your exit. I hope you find it this summer. And we'll see you back on this stage in September.
But wait, there's more. Wait. There's more. 2 things. Number 1, we don't hang up our boots now. We're going to be out and about all summer. So sign up at the book table, find out where the bookmobile is going to be, where we're going to have our other events, because Speakeasy will be out there. And I'm going to leave you with this one thought. T.S. Eliot from Little Giddings. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. See you all in September. God bless.